Welcome, everyone. I'd like to begin by returning to a question from yesterday. Alan M., in effect, asked the question, do we really need to go through all this? This sitting posture, this kind of a routine, this kind of a schedule, and so on and so forth. Do we really need it? So I hope I'm doing justice to your question, Alan. It's a good question, one which I hope you will answer in your brief Dharma talk today, but I'll say a few words also. I trust you all are coming to see from your own experience that most, if not all, of the suffering comes from not properly practicing. It's not the practice that causes the suffering. There may be pain involved, but already I think we've clarified pain is one thing, the suffering, dukkha, the first noble truth, is quite another. And that dukkha, that suffering, that is, in a sense, what is produced when we're not practicing properly. In effect, we are maybe unwittingly trying to escape from the practice. When I say the practice, when all is said and done, that means what is here and now. There's often all this jargon about being here and now, but are we? Are we? Usually when I see people talking about that, it's very clear they are running toward or away from something as they're talking about being here and now. Here and now, here and now. It doesn't work. Yes, even in Zazen, we can escape from ourselves. Thus, to return to Alan's fine question, the value of the physical posture. In effect, the physical posture is precisely regulated to put a stop to escaping. The way we put our legs, we're not going anywhere. We're not physically trying to escape. Let's go for a beer, huh? No. But we're putting our legs in such a way that helps us to do what we're doing, opening up the hips, allowing us to breathe properly, to be clear and focused, but not drowsy or sleepy. A certain alertness, as was mentioned yesterday. Yes. The way we hold our eyes. We don't open our eyes and look around. Obviously, this would cause the mind to generate all kinds of thoughts. But we don't close the eyes either, because then we tend to go into a world of dreams. So, as it said, half closed or half open, just naturally the focus falls in front of us. The way we hold our hands, either formally in what's called the half moon mudra, or simply more in lay practice, we tend to wrap the one hand around the thumb of the other and let it rest there. In effect, everything that we are doing with our body is helping us to not escape. And of course, the breath itself is doing the same thing. By breathing properly, gradually, we return to where we are. And of course, most importantly, what we do with the mind. Thus, for example, not just the physical posture and the breath, but a koan, for example, a traditional Zen koan. Well, what's that for? It's, well, rather to say to have an insight, it's to put a stop to all of that. That's all that koan is. If you think you can start something up with the koan, mentally cogitating about it, having ideas, this has nothing to do with it. The point of a koan is to put a stop to all of that. Then we can really see what is here. The self tries to escape because it doesn't really know where it is or what it is. The self, by its very nature, is split. And so it tries to put itself back together again. And of course, it can't do that. The very attempt to do it just breaks it up further. The self cannot come fully to rest because it is by its very nature split. It is not at rest. That's what the self is. This is the entrance to genuine practice. Without realizing this, in effect, we're still dreaming. We can't begin. And this is precisely what Alan M. will go into today. He will introduce a koan, a traditional koan, and ask us to inquire into that koan to see what is it really about? What is it really saying? What is it really showing, revealing to us? The self, by its very nature, is not at peace, it cannot come to peace. That's why there is spiritual religious practice. Here, by making that clear in our own bones, is where we enter the practice. Then what? Then what? Well, that is what, in effect, the koan we will take up today is revealing to us. Yesterday, we had a fine talk by Alan S. from the Buddhist Society in London. Today, we have a guiding member of the Soto School of Zen. I'm very happy to say, since I guess formerly are we a Rinzai group? I guess. But if we need to hold on to those distinctions, we are breaking them right now by inviting a Soto Zen guiding member to speak with us. Please turn your attention to the other Alan in the group, Alan M. Alan?
So firstly, I'd like to thank Jeff for inviting me to speak this morning. And I'd like to say how much of a pleasure it is for me to be back practicing in these surroundings with this group. And I'd like to say a warm welcome to all of those who've tuned in online from all around the world. So my talk this morning, on the surface of it, may appear to be a relatively simple talk containing a relatively simple story. But within this talk and within this story, there is profound teaching. I've titled the talk, Setting the Mind to Rest, and it is based around the story of Bodhidharma and the monk Shinko, which can be found in the Mumen Koan collection, or The Gateless Barrier in English, and it is case 41, if anybody would like to read a little bit more about it afterwards. So we have set aside all of our worldly responsibilities for a few days so that we can spend some precious time together in retreat and focus our time and energy into practice. Practice. To what end? To what goal? Why am I here? Why are each of you here? Why are the people online here? What is it that we are hoping to find or to learn? I'm going to pause for a few moments, and during this pause, I invite you to just sense into your deepest longing. What is your heart's deepest desire or longing? And now a story. And like all good stories, it begins with once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a monk named Shinko. He had spent many years in Buddhist practice, but still he had not found what it was that he was looking for. Reaching middle age, like many of us here, with some exceptions, he heard of a master called Bodhidharma. So he sought him out, went to visit him, and he repeatedly begged him to give him some instruction. Now, legend goes that Bodhidharma was famous for long periods spent in Zazen. So Bodhidharma didn't acknowledge these repeated requests from Shinko and paid little or no attention to him. One December day, it was snowing very heavily. And once again, Shinko stood outside Bodhidharma's cave until the snow had risen above his knees. At this point, Bodhidharma acknowledged that he was there, but still he would not teach him on the grounds that he was not yet sincere enough. And you sense how Shinko must have felt there in the snow, freezing cold, traveled all this way to see this eminent master who was now refusing to teach him. It is said in the story that in desperation, Shinko then took out a sharp knife, cut off his own left arm, and he presented it to Bodhidharma as a sign of his sincerity. At this point, Bodhidharma finally recognized the humility, the sincerity, the determination, the desperation of Shinko. And he took him on as a student, giving him the name Ika. So now that Shinko has become a student of Bodhidharma, he condenses all of his desperation and all of his seeking into a simple request, which he puts to Bodhidharma. Master, I am not at peace. I beg you, my teacher, please give me peace. Now, rather than answering this question, like all good teachers, I guess, Bodhidharma, knowing that Shinko had to find the answer to this question for himself, put the question back onto Shinko, saying, bring this one that is not at peace, and it will be pacified. After an unknown interval of time spent presumably in intense searching for the one who was not at peace, Shinko returned to Bodhidharma and said, I have searched, but it is finally unattainable. Bodhidharma then said, now it is thoroughly at rest. Generations later, Fenyang, a teacher in the lineage of Rinzai, composed the following verse about this story. I will explain some words for those watching online for whom English may not be their first language. So 9 years the founder faced a wall. It's Bodhidharma, who is said to have spent 9 years facing a wall in Zazen. 9 years the founder faced a wall, awaiting the proper potential of somebody suitable to be his successor. Standing in snow up to his waist, the successor never relaxed his brow. Respectfully, he asked for a method to pacify the mind. Searching for the mind and not finding it, for the first time in his life, he was free from doubt. We have heard Shinko's story, but is it not also my story and your story? We're not in China. It's not December outside. Jeff is not in a cave. But still, here we are. We have come from some distance to seek something. Some of us may have greater levels of desperation or determination about that. And we are in essence carrying on what Shinko was doing, seeking an answer to this dukkha, or this sense of unsatisfactoriness that can permeate our experience and our lives. This dukkha comes from the term for the join between an axle and a cartwheel. And if either the axle or the hole in the wheel is not smooth, you get a very bumpy ride. And that's where the term dukkha comes from. So I sometimes think of it as like having a little bit of grit in your shoe. You can walk and you walk, but it's still there. It might disappear for a bit because it moves to a different part of the shoe. But then, hey, it's back again. And finally, you've got to address this issue if you ever want to find true peace. So this dukkha, this sense of not being at peace, That's certainly what brought me to practice and why I continue to practice. Now, within our practice, there is a need for a kind of a radical self-honesty, because it can be easy to just, gloss over some little bit of dukkha, some little bit of grit that still remains. But in our hearts, we kind of can recognize that that's what we're doing. And so we really need to see things through to the very bottom, to the very end of dukkha. How is it for you all now? Can you identify this sense of dukkha? Have you found a resolution? What more could anybody wish for or practice for than to find an enduring peace? Thank you for your attention.
We'd like to talk a little bit more about cutting off of the arm, because I know that that might be the story, some of the EDG especially when they hear it from the first time.
Okay.
It might be nice just to
Okay, I'm being asked to say a few words about the part in the story where Shinko cuts off his arm. This is a historical tale. We don't know whether Shinko cut off his arm or not. I think it's unlikely. I think this is it's a metaphor or a way of showing us how determined and how desperate Shinko was to find a resolution to his suffering. And so in the story, there are these signs of which are showing us how desperate he was, standing in the freezing cold, being rebuffed, coming back time and time again, and then cutting his arm off and presenting it to Bodhidharma. But I doubt very much if there was, a real basis to this, koan story that Shinko actually cut his arm off. And I also think you could take the metaphor a little further. Shinko presented his arm to Bodhidharma, but an arm is, in this practice, an arm is not even enough. We have to present everything into this practice. We can't hold a piece back. If we hold a piece back, then that separation that Jeff was talking about arises. So we have to pull everything together and put the whole lot into practice. The whole body, the whole breath, the whole mind, the whole everything. So, yeah. Rod.
When you hear the story of Shinko cutting off his arm, and you hear the stories about monks being left outside monasteries for goodness knows how many days without food before they're allowed through the door, and things like that, then I'm aware, or my sense is that we all come here because of dukkha, because of that disease, and trying to get to the bottom of it. But I suppose reading stories like that, you think, well, are we just paying it?
The question is, like the story of Shinko cutting off his arm, we have from the Japanese tradition the practice of monks being left outside the door of the monastery for several days, having to sit zazen in uncomfortable surroundings before being admitted. I mean, Jeff may be able to say a word about the Japanese aspects of this, but I guess these, well, in the Japanese monasteries, it's probably a way of screening out those who are genuinely determined and who are likely to persist with the practice, possibly rather than investing a lot of resources in somebody who's going to, leave after a week or two. Because in olden days, when people went to monasteries, the monastery would kind of provide for their needs. So I suppose there was that kind of trying to use the resources to the best avail. Even in this country, there are groups that don't publicize themselves well, in order to make it a little bit more difficult for students to seek them out. And I think it's just a way of just trying to select those who have the determination to carry on with what can be a difficult practice.